So good morning, everybody. Welcome to Newcastle University Careers Service and our event this morning for Science Careers Outside the Lab. We're focusing upon the healthcare sector. My name's Sandra Hobson-Tate and I'm one of the careers consultants in the Careers Service. So before our panelists introduce themselves and begin the session, I'd just like to go through some housekeeping with you. The session is being recorded. It will be available later to view on the university's Careers Service YouTube channel. So if you don't wish to appear in the recording, then please turn your camera off. However, I'd politely request if you wouldn't mind turning your cameras back on again, particularly for the Q&A session with our panelists. So we really encourage you to use today's session to ask our panelists lots of questions, maybe about their career history, their journey, their current role, any hints and tips they might have. If you want to use the chat box, that will be great. So Ange and I will be looking at the chat box today and managing that. Also, if you want to, during the Q&A at the end, you can raise your hand, and also then we'll go over to you so you can ask our panelists directly. The other thing I ask is, if you're putting anything in the chat box, would you mind noting who the question is for or what it's regarding? Okay, thank you. So, very pleased to welcome our panelists today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your really busy diaries. We are very grateful. A brief rundown of our session today. We have got representatives from the NHS Scientist Training Programme, as well as representatives from Newcastle Clinical Trials Unit. So I'm going to now briefly hand over to our first panellist, Amy. Thank you, Amy, and thanks everyone for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the session. Over to you, Amy. Thank you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you. Well, hi, thanks so much everyone for coming today. It's great to be here as well, so thanks for having us. As you've already seen, I'm Amy Clarkson, and I'm a trainee genetic or genomic counsellor on the Scientist Training Programme. I'm not going to talk too much about the Scientist Training Programme in this section, but feel free to ask questions about that in the Q&A, just because I know there's a lot of information out there already. So, bit of background about me, really. I've always loved science, and I've always been interested in health in particular and how the two kind of intersect. But being sort of a doctor or a nurse never seemed the right kind of career path for me, even though I knew I wanted to be in healthcare. I did actually write off science as a career option for me for quite a long period of time, because I thought that science was just in a lab. And aside from not really enjoying the lab aspect of science, I also have never been any good at it. And I always knew I wanted to work with people in a people-facing role. So I kind of just thought there wasn't anything out there which fit that, until actually a gene change was identified in my own family that meant that I had to go and see a genetic counsellor. And I was like, oh wow, this is a science career where you get to work with people, and in genetics, which is one of my favourite areas of science anyway. So it just seemed like the ideal blend of science and applying this to people for me. So in terms of my educational background, I studied English literature with biology and chemistry at A-level, and after a gap year I went on to study human sciences at university. This is a blend of social and biological sciences, which for me was a really good fit with genetic counselling. Currently genetic counselling is a graduate entry profession. There's no sort of undergrad, so you do have to go and study something. So that seemed like a great fit for me. While I was doing my degree, it was really important for me to gain experience that would stand me in good stead when applying to become a genetic counsellor. So a lot of the scientific stuff was covered by my degree as it is, but I did find it was really important to get a lot of caring experience. So I volunteered in a care home for people with dementia for my 3 years at university, and as well as if I was a peer supporter, which involved counselling training as well. Just because genetic counselling is just such a people role, you need to have that experience when applying. So that really helped me when I came around to applications. When I finished my degree, though, there weren't any positions available as trainee genetic counsellors in the north of England. Because I have ties to the region, I had to look into a different option. So I actually started training as a mental health social worker, which was a great experience, but quite quickly I realised it wasn't a good fit for me. Very luckily, a position came up on the STP the following year in genetic counselling, and I was really lucky to get that position. And between those two jobs, I also worked in financial services in the private sector briefly, which was a massive detour, but actually was a really fantastic experience for me. It was something completely different, and I'm really glad about the time that I spent there, even though it was brief. So just a bit about where I'm at now. I've been in this role, so I'm my third year of the scientist training plan, third and final year. So about 2.5 years in, and I'm hoping to qualify in September. As a genetic counsellor or as a trainee genetic counsellor, we see patients. We usually have clinics maybe 2 or 3 times a week, which I think most people would say is their favourite part of the job. But actually, you probably spend more time not with patients than you do with patients, which is a really important thing to be aware of. A lot of this involves clinic prep and post-clinic work, such as gathering information, talking to other healthcare professionals, writing letters, all that kind of a thing. And other responsibilities such as educating other health professionals. We have an on-call system as well, only 9 to 5 Mondays to Fridays, but just taking queries from patients, other kind of clinicians, other genetic centres, and also prenatal genetic counselling for people who are maybe pregnant and have a genetic condition within the family. But really what we do essentially is we see people who are affected by or at risk of affected by genetic conditions, and as well as providing information, provide them support, psychosocial support in adjusting to this information too. I absolutely love my job. I could talk about it for ages, but I'll move on from that bit just to say, if people are interested in genetic counselling as a career, I would say attending some of the open days that various different genetic centres run, and a lot of which have been online recently, which means that, you know, there's not those sort of physical barriers, is a really great place to start. There are also great online courses available, ones tailored specifically to genetic counselling, and talking to genetic counsellors is vital. If after doing your research you are really keen on the profession, you will need to get that care experience. So I'd say it's never too soon to start getting that in different various ways. And it's always great to just keep up to date with the field, so just keeping up to date with what's going on in genetics and that kind of a thing. I know I'm coming up towards my 5 minutes, so I just want to say, you know, careers aren't always linear and you might take detours, but for me, you know, that detour for me actually probably helped me to get to where I am today. I don't have anything negative to say about my genetic counselling or scientist training program experiences, and I'm really happy, obviously, in the Q&A section to take any questions, and looking forward to seeing what everyone else has to say as well. So thank you.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. Thank you so much for that, then, Amy.
Thank you.
We're going to, if there are some questions coming up in the chat box, just to remind everyone, we're going to address those at the end. So now also we're going to go on to Paula. Good morning, Paula. How are you?
Hey, all good here. How are you all? Oh, my face is huge. Right. So this is a slight change of direction from what Amy was talking about in terms of working in healthcare, because I'm a clinical bioinformatician, which sometimes can be quite difficult to explain to people because I work in a hospital and I never see a patient. So to understand how it works, a clinical bioinformatician is an embedded role. It's something that you do to support other people who are in turn providing care to patients. So a lot of what you do depends very much on who you're embedded with. And the STP works out that it has 3 different parts of clinical bioinformatics, exactly depending on which group hosts you. The one I have chosen is bioinformatics for physical sciences, which tends historically to be associated with medical physics groups. So there's an expectation that you have at least some understanding of physics to know what's going on. But the vast majority of the work is computer science. So exactly how I ended up here is going to be slightly surprising, because I actually trained as a zoologist and my expertise is insects. I have not found this expertise to be terribly useful in the workplace, although I know a lot about bees. But I would echo what Amy said about detours, and a lot of the skills I picked up during my past career and education have been incredibly useful. I started out as a biologist, and then eventually got a master and a PhD in zoology, and then I worked in academic research for several years. And the skills that I got from that I use every day are mostly about flexibility and the willingness to learn new things and being self-directed in solving problems. All of these are things that you don't necessarily need a particular specific degree for, and in fact, having a variety of experiences might actually be the best way about it. I have not found that the fact I didn't do physics in particular has held me back in any way, but the typical background that you would expect for someone who does clinical bioinformatics for physical sciences is the hard sciences. So you a degree in physics or maths or engineering are the most common backgrounds that you see. I have actually found that the biology I know has helped a lot. So if you are thinking in that direction, actually, I would recommend trying to pick up a little bit of medical knowledge and biological knowledge, because that does come up quite a lot. And one of the reasons it comes up a lot is that, unlike academia, you end up working with a lot of people who do different jobs from yours. In fact, the vast majority of people you interact with will be clinicians, researchers, some other technical roles in medical physics. So you might interact with radiologists or other clinical scientists. This was one of my main motivations for moving from academia into this role. Academia is great if you are very motivated by curiosity, but eventually you realize you're only working on toys and not the real world. And I think at some point you just get tired of that, and that happened to me after a few years. And I'm finding that in terms of challenging project relation, this is absolutely as good as academia. And in fact, a lot of the work that I do has to do with research. I would say that more or less there's an equal split between actual computer science, developing software, doing data mining and research projects, and doing project management, risk management, and quality assurance. Again, this goes back to the fact that this is work that goes out in the real world. You produce things that are not just proofs of principles. They could end up being used on patients. So you have to work to a very different standard than even the rest of the software industry in many cases. And that can be really motivating, even if eventually you don't actually get to talk to the patients themselves. Although the role doesn't actually have patient contact directly, there are opportunities, if you enjoy that, to get involved in patient engagement. I have found that people really like to know about database projects. They want to know that the information they gave to the healthcare system has been used to make research better for someone, care better for someone else. It's been used to track the side effects of a drug or the effectiveness of a treatment. So I found that works really well, and it's very satisfying if it's something that you like. But for myself, I knew I didn't want a patient-centered role because I know I'd be rubbish at it. And it's good to know that there is a space for those of us who are sort of socially awkward. So that's definitely, I think, a really good opening for people who are interested in the hard sciences. They like that intellectually and they're good at that sort of thing, but they want to have a job that has a positive impact on society, where you can see what you're building, and you can work in a way that engages a lot of different people, lots of clever people you work with, which is always satisfying. So in terms of advice, I think I'm not in a terribly good position to tell you to do the same that I did, because I'm slightly unusual in my background, but I would definitely say get some programming experience. It doesn't matter what, because you won't know what the department who hosts you will use as their normal software stack. It's more to acquire the mindset rather than the specific expertise. unlike what Amy was talking about, there isn't really an expectation that you'd have a background in care, but you do want to prove somehow, and that really can take many different forms, the fact that you are interested in giving out to people and making a difference. For me, it was a lot of science engagement and outreach activities. But really, it comes down to what you've done and what you care about. Some knowledge of biology helps, especially when you're talking to medics. But I should say, because the STP is not very well known in the environment of the harder sciences, it's actually slightly easier to get in for these jobs than the more biology-based ones. So I would definitely recommend giving it a try if this is something you're interested in.
Great. Thank you so much, Paula. Thank you. That was really insightful. And again, I've just noticed we've got some questions already coming through the chat for you later on. So next up, we have Jen and Emily from Newcastle Clinical Trials Unit. Would you like to share your screens, please?
Great, thank you. I will share my slides. Okay, I'm hoping that everybody can see that. I guess just let me know if you can't. Okay, so my name's Jen Walker. I'm a Senior Trial Manager at the Newcastle Clinical Trials Unit, and I'll be speaking to you today with my colleague, Emily. Emily, if you want to introduce yourself.
So hi, I'm Emily. I'm the Quality Assurance Manager that works at the Clinical Trials Unit with Jennifer.
Great, thank you. This is our website. Please do check us out if anyone's interested after our talk. Okay. So the Newcastle Clinical Trials Unit was established in 2003. We are a UK clinical research collaboration registered trials unit. So that is for trials units who have a demonstrated track record of experience in coordinating multi-centre trials with expert staff. In Newcastle CTU, we support the design, the development and delivery and analysis of high quality clinical trials. We also collaborate to support a wide range of designs and different types of trials as well. So we collaborate on drug trials, device trials, surgical interventions, clinical investigations, so that's devices that don't have a CE mark, and also adaptive trials. We have a core team of senior trial managers, that's my role, trial managers, clinical trial administrators, secretaries, data managers, and a quality assurance team as well. We work really closely in teams on our trials to make deliver. In the unit, there are over 50 staff with around 40 active trials, so we're a very active unit. So our main office is based in Newcastle city centre on Claremont Terrace. We also have a hub office based in James Cook University Hospital as well, for trials that are sponsored by South Tees. We work really closely with several other sponsors, including Newcastle Hospitals, as well as Cumbria, Northumberland Tyne and Wear Trust as well. So this is our current unit organogram, just to give you an idea of kind of what the structure is like at the moment. Helen Hancock is our director, but we also work really closely with trial statisticians, health economists, as well as the Research Design Service, North East and North Cumbria. So the RDS is actually funded by the National Institute for Health Research, and they support research teams to develop and submit grant applications to the NIHR and other peer-reviewed funding programs as well. So we provide advice to the RDS, and we offer collaboration for new trials that require a trials unit. Okay, so a bit about me now. So I actually have a psychology degree from Leeds University. So my degree was very research and stats heavy, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So that led me to want to pursue a career in research. And I was actually looking for jobs as an RA at the time when I graduated. So I was doing temping, admin work, whilst I was applying for jobs and going for interviews, and looking at how I could get experience, because a lot of the interviews I was going for were saying that I needed experience in the area. So that actually led me to a temping job in the Newcastle Joint Research Office at Newcastle Hospitals as a secretary. I saw that there was a career path there, and I think that probably not a lot of people know about it. There's a career path with job opportunities, and I really enjoyed the work that was involved. So I worked hard, I took opportunities to learn, and I progressed up to research and development facilitator. The role was incredibly varied, from doing risk assessments and sort of processing studies to doing audits and writing processes for the office. And then in 2014, I was ready for career progression. So that's when I took the opportunity as a trial manager in the Newcastle CTU. So I was a TM for just over 4 years and then progressed to a senior trial manager, which is my current role. So I now lead the teams to deliver on trials. It's busy and challenging. We work to tight deadlines, but I really enjoy the work. And I've always enjoyed working in a high pressure environment, and you learn an incredible amount on the job. Just to tell you a bit more about my role, it involves providing oversight and leadership in clinical trial management, ensuring that trials are managed in line with sponsor, funder, research governance and regulatory requirements. As I said, it's high pressure, there's a heavy workload, we work to tight deadlines. I identify and mitigate risks, and I'm continuously problem solving. Every day is different. I do project and financial management as well as people management. I'm involved in training and development within the unit, and we also give operational input as a senior team. And I suppose just to add to that as well, that in terms of the senior trial manager role, that quite a few of my colleagues have come from lab backgrounds. So once you've got kind of research experience, you find then that you can kind of follow that path into the unit. But that's my background. So I will hand over to Emily now to continue.
Hi, so just a little bit about myself. So I come from more of a scientific background. I did a BSc on a biomedical science degree at Sunderland University. And when I graduated from then, a bit like Jen, I started to go out and wonder what career path that I was going to take. So the first job that I actually got was I became a research technician at Newcastle University. My very first role was in the Institute of Cellular Medicine, and I did a lot of work around warfarin dosing in children, and I used things like HPLC and different types of techniques to work with a PI on a study to develop warfarin dosing. From that, I then decided I really enjoyed research, but not as much lab-based. And what I decided to do is I moved into the cellular therapies department. So this is a department which is a joint department between the university and the trust, and it works on stem cell transplants. So in this department, you had your very routine work. So you start stem cell transplants for people that had different type of hematology disorders. And then it had what was very much its research platform, which was when we started to advance on stem cell therapies and start to look at how they could be used for other things. And this was such as stroke, they did cancer trials, we did a lot of things on people having heart attacks and how these stem cells could then be used in another way. I really enjoyed this work. So for a percentage of my job used to be quite lab-based. I was in the lab helping develop the stem cell transplants and different things like that. I also had an aspect of my job where I was more research involved. Now within this department, we were heavily linked to pharmacy, because when you work on clinical trials, you have to have pharmacy representation. And from this, I then decided that I was really interested in clinical trials and how they worked. So then I went to study a master's part-time. So for all I worked the 5 days a week, I was allowed time off through my job to do my lectures and things like that. And it took me 2.5 years to complete my master's. When I got the Masters, I then got an internal promotion in the unit, and I was quite fortunate that I moved over to the NHS for this promotion. And with this, I then become quite patient facing. So not only did I help in the lab part to develop the trials that we're going to have in the stem cell therapies, I also actually got to meet the patients that got them, which was very fortunate, and it was quite a nice way of working. I also then got the opportunity when working in that department to work under a quality assurance team, and I started to realise that I quite enjoyed the documentation side, the regulatory side, and understanding why we had things that were going on in clinical trials and what we had to, the regulations that we had to abide to. From that, I then decided I would like to progress higher, and I started looking at my qualifications. I then joined the Team Leaders Programme, which is held at Newcastle University, and I gained the background into how to manage teams and things like that. And then with that knowledge, I applied for the current job that I have now as a QA manager, and I started that in September 2017. Also to know, while I was working, I also become a registered scientist. So this is something you do through the Science Council. They do 3 levels of, you can be a technician, a scientist, or you can also register as a chartered scientist. And this is just another thing to add to your CV that's also good to show that you meet that kind of criteria. Oh, next slide, Jen.
Oh, sorry.
So just a bit about my role now. So I am overall responsibility for quality assurance within our unit. So I work as the QA manager for a team. I create policies and procedures. So what it is we work in a very highly regulated environment. We have to protect patient safety and the integrity of the results for the trials that we have. So I have to make sure that everything we do abides by these regulations. I provide a lot of advice and guidance on regulatory requirements. So like Jen, who works on the trials, I'll provide advice to the trial teams to make sure that they are compliant. I host a lot of external and external audits and inspections. So because we're regulated, we would be inspected by someone like the MHRA. So in that case, I'm the one that would host these sort of inspections. I also perform a lot of internal audits myself. So this is just to ensure compliance within the unit. I identify deviations, perform root cause analysis, and implement corrective and preventive actions. So from my scientific background, this is very much problem solving, and this is something that I really do enjoy in my role. As I am in the management team, I do have responsibilities such as people management, and I also have to work with a lot of external QA colleagues. So I link in with a lot of other clinical trials units nationally, and just make sure that we're all abiding by the same rules, regulations, and sharing good practices. I'm involved in a lot of training and development, and I also, like Jen, have a lot of input into the senior team. Next slide. So other than Jen and I, who are part of the management team, we do have some lower roles within the unit. So the next grade down would be your trial managers. So your trial managers are very much independent enough to set up clinical trials. So they're involved in everything that they do with clinical trials, whether that's making the regulatory submissions, amendments to trial, protocol development. They manage the day-to-day running of the trials within the unit. This is things such as for checking for patient safety and data integrity. We do a lot of monitoring, whether this is visiting sites and looking at sites and the data that they're collecting, or whether this is interactions we have with sites remotely. They're involved in every aspect of the trial from setup to closeout. So what it is setup of a trial is very busy. You're setting it up, you're getting the documentation ready, you're getting ready for recruitment, but there's also a very busy stage at the end of the trial where you're closing down, you're getting your results in, and you're getting ready for analysis. There's also line management opportunities within this. So the trial managers would line manage trial administrators or secretaries that we do have within our unit. A lot of our trial managers in the unit do have a scientific background, but we do have others that come from other backgrounds. And it's one of them, it is a mixed role where you don't just need scientific understanding, but there's also things like problem solving, organisational skills, a lot of other skills that is needed for the role. Another role we have in the unit is database manager. So this is more of our technical role, and they're in charge of setting up databases in which the data from the trials is input into. So they have a lot of programming skills, and they're very specialist in an area of building the databases and computerized systems. They do a lot of monitoring of data, checking on patient safety and looking at data to see if there's any anomalies and things like that. They work very closely with statisticians and making sure that, for the end of the trial, that the data that's going to be analysed. Likewise, as the trial manager, these do have line management responsibilities within the role. And from our data managers, a bit like the trial managers, we do have a couple of data managers that have a scientific background, but we also have people that have come from have a geography background, some people that just have a programming background, very strong IT background, and it's a varied role. So for if you didn't have a scientific background, you could still have skills within what you may have done as your degree that could be transferred across to be in this role. Below the trial manager and data manager, we have the trial administrators. So these are normally work underneath both the data managers and the trial managers, and they do things like they do a lot of the helping. So they do a lot of the same roles as the trial manager, as in helping to set up clinical trials, close out clinical trials and things like that, but they do it from a lower level. So they do things like dealing with site queries, tracking and processing, arranging and coordinating meetings. They do things like off-site monitoring and the support with the prep for any kind of monitoring activities that the team do. So it's a very busy role. Now, what it is it's quite a good progression role within the unit. So you might come in as a clinical trial administrator when we advertise one of these jobs, and there's quite a lot of ones within the unit who have progressed from the administrator all the way up to a trial manager. And it's a good role to get used to whether or not you would enjoy clinical trials in the working environment that we work under, if you're interested in that type of role. Next slide. Oh, that's just it. And just if any questions, Pete could just put them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Jen and Emily, for your presentation. Again, questions are coming through and we'll put those at the end. So we're going to move on now to Kate. How are you there, Kate?
I'm good. I think because my computer crashed, so I had to come back. Can I have screen sharing permissions, please?
Yeah, and
Thank
can you do that?
Okay, excellent, thank you. Okay, everybody can see that? Okay, so I'm Katie. I'm a first year trainee in medical physics. So I've just started the scientist training program, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got here and what I'm doing now. So I actually started out doing an integrated master's in astrophysics at the University of Kent, which I really enjoyed. And after finishing that, I knew I wanted to go on and do a PhD, but at the time I wasn't too fussed about which area of physics. So I ended up doing a PhD in theoretical physics at Newcastle University. And about halfway through that, I realized it wasn't really for me. So I started to think about what else could I do to move away from academia. Undergrad, I had done a module in medical physics, which I found really interesting. So it was something I started to look into, and I had a friend who was already doing a route into becoming a medical physicist, which is a way of getting qualified as a clinical scientist as an alternative to the scientist training program. So I thought this, like going for the STP, would be a good idea. I applied in 2019 and I got through to interview, but no offer at that point. And I think part of that was I wasn't fully prepared for what the interview process was like, and I didn't have enough experience. So I went away and arranged a shadowing placement at the Royal Hallamshire Hospital. And I also did a couple of days at the Doncaster Royal Infirmary just to get more of a feel for what medical physicists actually do and all the different departments that they're involved in. And that definitely helped because I knew a lot more about the field when I applied again next year. I also did some volunteering with St John Ambulance, because even though medical physicists aren't directly, don't actually deal directly with patients, this was good to show that I did have an interest in patient care. And so when I applied again in 2020, I actually got through despite all the COVID stuff happening. So I was successful and I got to come back to Newcastle, which I'd really been hoping for. I now primarily work at the Freeman Hospital while I'm doing my first year rotations. I will be doing placement in Sunderland in nuclear medicine. And as for my second and third years, I don't yet know where I might end up. I could be anywhere in the northeast, or even go over to Cumbria, because Carlisle have just got a new cancer treatment centre, which Newcastle is involved in running. And after I complete the STP, I'll be a qualified clinical scientist, and who knows where the future may take me after that. So a bit more info about why medical physics. So like I said, I did the PhD in theoretical physics, and then I realised I didn't actually want to be doing theoretical physics in academia forever, because I found it was interesting in its own way, but it had no practical application to actually making a difference in the real world. Whereas medical physics, it's something where you do the work and you see the direct benefit it has to patients, which is really quite satisfying to know. I had an interest in medicine as well as with physics, so this was a good point, and I had enjoyed the medical physics module I did at undergrad. So it's good to being able to use my physics skills and knowledge to actually help patients, even though there isn't too much direct interaction with patients, because I think I'm a bit like Paula in that regard, that I wouldn't want too much of that. It's a very varied job role, so there are a lot of specialisms within medical physics, which I'm currently rotating through in my first year, and I'll have to choose one to specialise in my second year, but there are a lot of different things that you could be involved in, and it's a very hands-on job, so even though you're not dealing with patients so much, there's a lot of dealing with equipment and technology, and there's still opportunities for research. So even though I didn't want to do that full time, I do like getting involved in new research in different like techniques or treatments that could be developed. So what does a trainee medical physicist or a medical physicist do? So there are 4 different specialisms for the STP for medical physics. They are radiation safety, imaging with non-ionizing radiation, and imaging with ionizing radiation, and radiotherapy. And then I've added research here because that is something that every STP has to do as part of their second and third year. You do a research project, and a clinical scientist in medical physics would also typically get involved in research. So I'll talk a bit about radiation safety, because that is a placement I've just finished, where one of the tasks I had was designing an X-ray room from scratch, which I really enjoyed. Basically got given a room plan or a floor plan and told design the room, where to put the equipment, what equipment you need, what safety features, so on. So that was quite interesting. Also, if you're a radiation safety physicist, you would deal with dose calculations from radiation incidents. So if a patient or member of staff got exposed to radiation they shouldn't have, you would calculate how much radiation it was, what was the risk, and report it back to them. Imaging, so I've said it's non-ionizing and ionizing radiation. So non-ionizing is things like MRI and ultrasound, and you would be involved in maintaining the equipment and the scanners, and making sure it's working correctly. Ionizing radiation, so that's things like X-rays, CT scans, nuclear medicine, which is where you make somebody radioactive in order to better image them, which is quite exciting. There's lots of different things that physics can be applied to in medicine. So typically you'd be involved in quality assurance testing for that kind of thing. And also in terms of radiotherapy, medical physicists have some involvement in the treatment planning. So if you're shooting a beam of external radiation at a tumour to treat cancer, medical physicists are involved in planning the process for that and making sure it's safe, and also making sure the linear accelerators which are used to treat cancer are working correctly. So that is the kinds of things that a medical physicist may get involved in. And so yeah, I'll happily answer questions about that in the Q&A session.
Great, thank you so much, Katie. That's brilliant, really good, thank you. So our final panelists now, we're going over to Tomiki. Good morning, Tomiki, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Hi there, nice to meet you, and please share us your story.
Sure, so my name is Tomiki. I am a final year cardiac scientist trainee as part of the NHS scientist training programme. And my background and my educational history, I did a biology degree at Aberystwyth University, and I knew I wanted to work in healthcare. I just didn't know where exactly I wanted to work in. So even leading up to university, I'd done quite a bit of work experience. So I did work experience in a dentist, in a pharmacy, and during my undergrad, I actually did work experience at the hospital I work at now, and they kind of took me around to different departments and let me see how things run day to day. So that was really helpful. And it wasn't until I had an email from my career service at my university telling us about the scientist training program, and I thought, I love science, I love technology, and also I knew I wanted something patient-facing, something to do with healthcare. So I applied to do cardiac sciences, which is part of the physiological sciences branch. So it's really patient-facing. What do we do? our department, we are involved in a big range of different things. So we kind of mainly focused in diagnostics. So there's a non-invasive diagnostics aspect, which involves ECGs, looking at blood pressure, and doing exercise stress tests. So we have a patient on a treadmill and we watch what their heart's doing, their ECG during. Then there's an invasive diagnostic aspect. So there's a thing that we don't implant, the doctor implants, but we kind of monitor the ECG and we program the device. And it's a little device that they put into a patient to monitor their ECG. We also you go into the lab, and one of the things when patients have angina or heart attacks or things like that, we're part of the technician group who look at the ECG and monitor the patient while the doctor's looking at the vessels and there's also other staff like nurses and x-ray staff that are watching and doing their bit as well. So it's quite a multidisciplinary kind of career where you meet lots of different people. And what I'm doing, I'm specializing in something called echocardiography. So essentially, it's a really fancy word for cardiac ultrasound. So like a baby scan, we pop a probe on the patient's chest and take pictures of the heart, make lots of measurements, and then we write a report. So that's what I'm doing. That's my day-to-day now. And just a bit of advice, I would say work experience is really valuable. Even if you can't get something exactly in the field you want to work in, there's a lot of different work experiences that you can use transferable skills you've learned from there and apply it on. So I didn't do work experience in cardiac sciences, but I can use the work experience that I gained in the dentist, being in a healthcare environment, working as part of a team, meeting patients and being comfortable speaking and communication skills and things like that. Another thing that I found so helpful was I spoke to my career service and I had one-on-one interview practice, and that was so helpful for me because I'd never had a proper graduate job until now. So I'd never had much experience in interviews and things like that. So that was really helpful. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Great, thank you so much. Right, so thank you very much to all of our 6 guest panelists. I'm going to have a look now at the chat box. Ange, can we show the next slide, please? And we'll have a look at the chat as well. So I'm going to go through, we've got a lot here. So the first question that we have came in for Paula. So the question is, what sort of training did you have in bioinformatics before starting your jobs?
Right, so when I was in school in the 90s, we did BASIC. You now find about this in documentaries about computer science. It doesn't really matter very much exactly which language or environment you work in. And in my case, I didn't have any formal training, so none of my degrees had a computer science component. Mostly I picked things up as I needed them. Most of what I used was R, which is a statistical programming language. I did a bit of Python, but when I found myself in the job, a lot of what I do is databases in SQL, which I had never even heard of before I started. There isn't really an expectation that you'd come in as an expert. The point of I think an important point about the Stellantis training program is that it is designed to train you. If you come in knowing already what you're supposed to know, it's a waste of NHS's money and everyone's time to put you through a training program. You're there to learn, so ideally you want to come in as ignorant as possible. I think any opportunity that you have to do some kind of coding, even entirely on your own, get yourself a Raspberry Pi, program up something, can be enough just to get you in the mindset and also to see whether you like it. You need to be a particular type of person to enjoy programming. Anyone can learn how to program, but not everyone likes it. and that becomes quite a large part of your day. So it's really important for you to know that you like doing that.
Okay.
That's what I'd say.
Great, thank you. And we have another question coming in again about the STP. Are you aware whether international students studying in Newcastle are allowed to apply to the STP?
So what I can say, first of all, the STP is a work contract. It is not a training program. So it is a training program, it says in the name, but it's not degree. Although over the 3 years you pick up a master's, you are hired full-time by the trust where you work. So the same regulations apply as any other job in the UK. That said, there are loads of STPs who are not British nationals. So that definitely happens.
Right. I think the first thing we would say is check with our visa team as well, who can give you lots of advice on your status. We have another question that came in for Amy here. So the question for you is, can someone get a genetic counsellor job with just a bachelor's degree?
So currently for most people you would require a master's degree to become a genetic counsellor, whether that's via the scientist training programme like me, or there are other universities such as Cardiff and Glasgow that offer a self-funded master's programme. The reason I say most people is because there is a slight exception that people with nursing backgrounds might have a slightly different route into genetic counselling, but for the most part you would need the MSc. It does change sometimes, and I would say like keep your eyes open on the NHS sort of health careers websites that do tend to have details of that as well. Also the Association of Genetic Nurses and Counsellors, the AGNC website's a good place to look for information about genetic counselling too. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, brilliant, thanks Amy. Yes, that Health Careers website's excellent as well. We have another one now for Jen and Emily. So this is about data analysts. So how important is it to have an experience in data analysis based projects in order to be a part of your organisation? And second part is, would you recommend any certain courses or internships to someone who has less knowledge? Over to you.
So in terms of the data analysts, I would say that I think Emily mentioned that we do have people from quite a wide range of backgrounds. So one of our data managers was working in geography. In fact, two of them were. But I think that it could give you the edge over somebody. I mean, I suppose it depends on who's being interviewed on the day. So if you're looking to get the edge, then maybe getting some experience in that area. And I think also the research aspect as well can give you that edge if you've worked in something research related. But at the same time, it's something that you can learn when you come to the unit, and there are training courses that the unit can put you through as part of that. Emily, I don't know if you had anything to add to that one.
I would just say as well, what probably is a good skill to have is if you've got any kind of programming background. So if you do know any kind of SQL training, or if you have come from being a data manager type role. So it's not the fact that you might know the back end of a database or build a database. It could be the fact that you've done data entry and know a lot more about that side. So I would think that would give you a bit more of the edge as well if you understand like data entry and research as not that background that you could come from.
Great, thanks Emily. Great, gosh, this inbox, this chat box is loading up now. So another question now is about the STP. So I'm going to ask this to Kate and Tomiki. So we have a student here who's doing an integrated master's and was wondering whether or not they should change to a BSc, or do you recommend any certain topics for a master's that would be good for when applying to the STP?
Okay, well, I think this is really up to you. You haven't mentioned which STP stream you would want to apply for, but I think if you do go ahead with the integrated masters and you get to choose your project, if you do pick a project which is relevant to the STP specialism you want to do, that would be something really good to talk about and put on your application. But at the same time, it's not vital. My integrated masters project had absolutely nothing to do with medical physics. I did something about relativistic electrons, and then I went and did a PhD in something entirely unrelated. So there are roundabout ways of getting onto the STP without having directly relevant research experience. But if you know that's what you want to go for, and you have the opportunity to get relevant research experience, I can only see it as being an advantage.
Great, thanks so much there, Katie. Tomiki, we've got a question directly for you. The question is, how much face-to-face patient interaction do you have weekly?
So we have patient-facing interaction every single day. So there's not a day that goes by where we've not seen patients. So I'd say in a day, on average, people do maybe 6 scans on average. So that involves speaking to the patient, performing the scan on the patient, and then we go and write the report. So it's a daily kind of occurrence.
Great, thank you. And a quick question for Amy here. What's the career progression like for a genomic counsellor?
Yes, so obviously we all start off as trainees. Once you are trained and registered, you can sort of become a qualified registered genetic counsellor on starting at band 7 NHS usually. Then it depends on the department what they have sort of different terminology, but you can sort of move up the ranks to sort of a slightly more senior and then up into management above that kind of a thing. The sort of detailed career structure is also on the AGNC website that I mentioned earlier as well, but there is that scope for progression. I would say even up to our sort of, some people call them leads, some people call them consultant genetic counsellors, who are sort of at the top of the genetic counselling hierarchy. They do still see patients and have that patient contact, which I think is a great thing about that. Obviously, I guess once you're into management as well, you could move across, but that's what it looks like for genetic counsellors in general.
Great, thanks Amy. Now I'm really mindful of time. We're nearly approaching the end of our session. We've still got very many messages in the inbox. So what I'm suggesting that we do is, if you don't mind, we'll stop the Q&A session here now just for timing. And if we then can email you some of the questions that are still in the chat box, would that be all right with our panelists?
Yeah, of course.
Brilliant. And then that way then, yeah, we've still got, oh gosh, there's even more messages coming through. So it has been such a fantastic session. I can really see that everybody has really enjoyed it. It's been very interesting to hear your stories and how you got into your careers in healthcare. So thank you so much for your time today. So I'm just going to, Ange, can we just share the screen again for further support there? So for further, yeah. I'll just carry on anyway, Ange. But what we'll just say is thank you so much for your questions. There's a link here for further information still on science careers outside the lab. Go and have a look at the careers service website, and the link is there. And also we've still got many more panel sessions taking place this week. So please do check the website. And also, if you ever need any support from the careers service, then if you want to explore your career options, you want application support, one-to-one support, whatever the question is, we have a host of careers consultants available and very willing to chat with you and talk through all your career options. Once again, I'd like to thank our panelists for dedicating their time to speak to us this morning. And can I ask for a virtual round of applause, please, for all of our panelists there. Thank you so much for your time. And to everyone who's joined us today, thank you as well. We hope that you've enjoyed the session. And before we finish, we've just got a quick poll to run just to hear your feedback. And we're not going to share these results with everybody, but just the question is, did the session help you understand more about the range of non-lab-based roles for science students and graduates in this area? That's great. We've got some really good answers coming through there. Thank you so much for your time. My name is Sandra Hobson-Tate. If you can think of any further questions that in hindsight you wish you'd asked, please let me know and I will let our panelists, and we will be publishing this along with our YouTube channel. Thank you everybody for your time and have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.